The Raiders, here we go. Win total 8. Juice to the over. Disaster last year. 6-10 straight up. 5-9-2 ATS. 11-5 to the under. Del Rio out. Chucky's back in. They signed Jordy Nelson and Doug Martin. They traded Patterson. Crabtree's gone. They released King, their punter, and they released Sean Smith. Remember we talked about 2 years ago, they were plus 16 in the turnover battle and won every close game. That didn't happen last year. Minus 14 turnover margin. That was 30th. Horrible job with the turnovers. Carr took a step back. The offense really struggled. It was rough, Teddy, and a lot of professionals, kudos to them. They called it that the Raiders were going to take a step back after the magical season they had a couple of years ago. Gruden back in the league after a 10-year layoff, and he signs a monster 10-year deal as they get ready to come to Vegas, hopefully in 2020.
Yeah, and of course, when you start looking at Oakland last year, there's only one thing to look at. In theory, that's the turnover margin. You know, when you go from plus 16 one year to minus 14 the next year, a 30 turnover differential in a single season, it's going to have a negative impact. It certainly did. 14 takeaways, well below league average, 28 giveaways, well above the league average. Those are problems when it comes to creating turnovers and turning the ball over too much. So, enter Chucky, Jon Gruden. And of course, the fan base is going to love it. There's a guy that's won a Super Bowl. Certainly the ownership is going to love it. A 10-year deal. They don't have to worry about the coaching anymore. They got a guy the fans love. He's going to bring the team to Vegas. Now, when you start talking about some of the guys that Jon Gruden has brought in, well, there's two arguments you can make. All right, he's brought in a ton of veterans. Talk about Jordy Nelson, Leon Hall, Derek Johnson, Doug Martin, Martavius Bryant, Christian Hackenberg. They bring
Terrible.
Of all.
Hey, real quick, how about those two trades? Bryant's going to be a free agent. He's been suspended because of drugs, and then you trade for Hackenberg, second round pick. He hasn't played a snap in the league, for Christ's sake.
Sure, Hackenberg has big bust written all over him. Let me give you 2 quotes here. Okay, this is from an anonymous NFL executive. Here's the first. You sign old guys when you're trying to build good culture. They can show the young guys how to practice and eat right and sleep right and respect the coaches. It makes the first year easier. And sometimes those guys are good enough to win the games for a year or two before they descend. So you can understand Gruden wants these veterans. He wants to put a different type of cultural stamp on the organization. That being said, the guys that the Raiders sign, all right, to a man, maybe Bryant's not washed up. They all look washed up, Quote, they signed Derek Johnson, who was done. I wondered what tape they put on that said this guy can still play. The Chiefs loved him. Andy Reid loved him. And they cut him because he knew he had reached that point at age 35 where he had nothing left. I understand Gruden brought in a bunch of character guys. I question about the skill level of many of these character guys. On paper, this Raider team, when it comes to playmakers, there's not that many of them, Pauly. There really aren't.
Yeah, I know. And the offense really struggled and took a step back, which I think he'll do wonders and work with Carr. That'll be one positive with bringing Gruden back. And the lunatic doesn't sleep. He's in there at 3 a.m. Mainstream stats, they were 17th in total offense, 25th rushing attack, on defense 23rd. And usual, the Raiders haven't been able to stop anybody with the secondary. They were 26th against the pass as well. Max a stud. But other than that, not a lot to work with on defense. Not a bad job in the draft, which I know, get back to me in 5 years. But, I like Key out of LSU and some of the other moves they made. I'm not concerned about the fan base like you are. They're sold out. It's hard to get a ticket, even though they're out the door. But they had some issues at home as well. But, long time, Teddy. Long time. Gruden's been out. You want to say he's in the booth, whatever. But the guy hasn't been a coach since 2008. And a lot has changed.
Sure, no question. And, we look at this team last year. I said the turnovers were the biggest issue. You say, what's the problem with turnovers? The offensive line. That offensive line underachieved last year. Was the first all African-American starting offensive line in NFL history. And things absolutely, we don't know what happened behind the scenes there, but there was clearly something that happened. There was a national anthem controversy in D.C. week 3, and they never recovered. They lost the next 4. They were a disaster down the stretch. Now, that offensive line, in theory, should be pretty good. You bring in Rodney Hudson's back. Kelechi Asamele, 2 guys who are impact players for the offensive line. You bring in a couple of key free agents, particularly at the center position. You have Carr, you have Amari Cooper. This offense has pieces if they can protect their quarterback. The defense is where there are all kinds of issues. I mean, they've had Khalil Mack and blank. There's not a lot out there. When you look at the draft, number 1 draft choice, Colton Miller, he's going to help on that offensive line right away. Brandon Parker could as well. A couple of projects here in P.J. Hall and Arden Key, but 2 guys who, in theory, can help that defense. But I'm telling you, Pauly, when you grade this defense out on paper, not the defense of a playoff team. It's not the defense of a team that's going to win a whole lot of games. And you talk about the squad, that's fan support. I understand that they're still sold out. I also understand they're leaving. And you look at the 4-4 straight up record last year at home. One of the wins came against the Jets. One came against the Giants. One came against the Broncos. Bottom feeder, bottom feeder, bottom feeder. The only win they had at home all year against a decent team was that Thursday night win against Kansas City, which, if you remember the game, the refs literally gave it to them in the final seconds. They only won the home games that were hard to lose, Pauly. That's a concern for me about this supposed home field edge the Raiders have at the Coliseum.
All right, so I can say it because I can't prove it, but there appeared to be a disconnect and a problem once they had the fallout with the anthem on that Sunday night game against the Skins. With you on that one. Schedule AFC North, NFC West, 2 extra games at Miami and Indy at home. Great game to start. They've had the doubleheader on Monday night, the late game against the Rams at home. And then that's going to be tough, too. It's no picnic going to Miami that early in September with the humidity in the early start. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts on the schedule? You could see of a 2-4 out of the gates, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a ridiculously, it's a middle of the pack schedule, is the bottom line. When it comes to travel, however, the NFL somehow or other always manages to screw Oakland. They have the early start game in Miami, the West Coast team traveling east. They have the early start game at Baltimore, the West Coast team traveling east. They have the early start game at Cincy, the West Coast team traveling east. They find a way to give it to the Raiders just a little bit. But from a strength of schedule standpoint, it is middle of the pack, and the 2 extra games certainly aren't among the toughest. The game at Miami and then the Colts. But again, both of those teams should be better this year, which is going to lead us to a little shot clock time. Like the show? Help us keep the lights on. Please make sure to comment, share, and subscribe to all the Sportsbook Review videos. Thanks so much. Best of luck. Enjoy the game.